For some context, my mother has COPD and she normally has to use a wheelchair to get around. This happened after a bad flare-up, but it still affects the story a little. Because my mom has COPD, whenever we need to make a quick run to the store, she normally sends me in. It was an average day, or so I thought, and I'd just been to the gym, so I was wearing yoga pants and a gray tank top that said, "Working out because punching people was frowned upon." As I'm walking around those aisles gathering her list of items with one of those green shopping baskets, I notice a guy come down the opposite way while waving at me and smiling. I live in a southern state, so this isn't considered odd at all, and I oftentimes wave back and ask them how they're doing. I smile and wave back. Now, this guy looked to be in his 30s or 40s, and he obviously hadn't shaved in over a week. Other than that, there were no red flags as far as appearances go. Anyway, I end up leaving the aisle and walk over to the next one and head in. Not even 5 seconds later, I see the same man come from the opposite way. It wasn't until now when I noticed that he didn't have a cart, and I didn't see anything in his hands. That's when red flags started going off. I just thought to myself that I was overreacting and that maybe he just went down the wrong aisle, as I tend to do that a lot too. Being a paranoid person and still a bit worried, I try my best not to make any eye contact with him and grab what I need and hurry to the next aisle, pretending that I'm in a rush. I go down another aisle and bam, there he is again with nothing in his hands. By this point, I have everything I need, but I was genuinely afraid to leave. This guy has nothing in his hands, and if he's not checking out, what's stopping him from following me out? All the while, I'm telling myself that I'm overreacting and decided to prove it to myself. I go over to another section of the store where they have a display of nuts, gluten-free candies, and other weird snack items like banana chips. I walk around like I'm about to head into another aisle and stop at the end of the shelves, watching. Each time he had come into an aisle, he had come through the opposite sides, and sure enough, he comes walking down the aisle. I quickly shuffle around with my basket and act like I'm looking at the candies. The thing I didn't count on was him not seeing me. I don't know if it was because I'm very short or because he just did a quick glance and was just confused that I had disappeared. He quickly turned around and headed out of the aisle. Now, alarms start going off in my head. My original plan was to basically hide behind the shelves until he left, but I then hear someone call my name. I turn around and see my mom and niece at the checkout line, and my mom is leaning against one of those displays with various houseplants that they seasonally have. She's out of breath. I wanted to tell her about the man that was following me, but she seemed worked up about something else, so I decided to wait until I found out what was going on. As we were checking out, I see the guy walk up. He didn't naturally seem to care that I was with someone, and he didn't even hesitate as he grabbed a candy bar and got into the line right next to us. At this point, I don't know what to do. I'm quickly putting my stuff on the belt to try and hurry. Thankfully, this little old lady that was in front of the other guy had her cart filled to the brim. It gave me enough time to collect everything for us and get out of there. When we got into the car, my mom shocked me with what she said. "Did you see that man?" Yeah, I did. Did you see him?" I explained that I had seen him and that he was following me around the store. My mom lost it and started cussing like a sailor. And before we even pulled out of the parking lot, she had my dad on the phone, demanding him to drive her away in case the man would follow us. We lived just down the road, and we had actually passed my dad in less than 5 minutes. I asked my mom what made her come into the store, and what she said chilled me to the bone. She said that the guy was actually coming out of the store as I was going in, but stopped when I passed him. He turned his head around and made it very obvious that he was looking at my, sitting cushions, and hurried back to his car only to follow me back in. I don't want to think of how things could have gone much worse if I hadn't noticed him turning up in every aisle, or if my mom hadn't noticed his behavior, or if he had managed to check out at the exact same time as us and meet us at the exit. My husband was almost abducted. I think about this moment when he and I get into a disagreement and I immediately stop being mad at him. The idea that I almost lost him and never would have known what had happened is enough to calm even my most justified anger. This happened about 3 years ago. I was 24 and he was 25. It had pretty much been just me and him since we were 17 and 18, so my whole world was almost snatched away. It was late at night. I had just picked him up from work and we stopped at a Harris Teeter for a bottle of wine and pizza. I had both of our cell phones in my purse because that's just how we did it when we were out together. And for some reason, he didn't like having it in his back pocket. Also, my husband is very pretty. I mean, he's handsome, but he's got long, curly black hair and a slight build. And we both look way younger than we are. So we're in line, about to pay, when he realizes he left his wallet in the car. The store is pretty much empty and there was no one behind us, so he said, "I'll be right back," and ran out into the dark parking lot. Now, I'm anxious anyway, so when he was gone for literally 4 minutes, I ran outside to look for him. I saw a black truck with a trunk cover on it, driving away under the single street light, and my husband was nowhere in sight. I ran to our car, praying he was in there. Thank God he was. He was sitting in our locked car, staring at the truck until I, too loudly, smacked the passenger window. He looked at me with giant, terrified eyes. "Get in." He leaned over and unlocked my door and yelled at me to lock it back when I sat down. He was shaking and freaking out and hugging me. I finally just squeezed him and said, "Honey, what the hell happened?" He finally said, "Give me my phone," and dialed 911. I heard the story as he was telling it to the operator, and it still makes me want to throw up whenever I think about it. He had walked out to the car and noticed the black truck a lane over. We both worked in stores in that shopping center and had never been afraid of the parking lot, but luckily it sent up a big red flag. As he fumbled with the keys, no fob, he heard the truck start up and figured it was leaving. In the time it took for him to grab his wallet out of the seat and turn around, the truck was behind him, and a big man had opened the trunk. As the man turned around to face him, my husband just fell back in our car and slammed the door. The man didn't try the door right away. Instead, he hit the window in anger, and that's what saved my husband because he managed in that moment to lock the doors. The man just stood there for a whole minute, looking around and tried opening the door twice. Then he paced for a few seconds, then went back to the front of his truck and dug around. This whole time, my husband sat in horror without his phone. I really wish he thought to honk the horn or something to scare the guy off, but he was too scared to think. Finally, the man just climbed into the cab and sat until I guess he saw me running out of the store and zoomed off. The police arrived and my husband gave a description of the truck and the man. Tall, big, white, balding, and dressed in all black, like a sweatsuit. The truck either didn't have a license plate or he covered it. They didn't find him that we know of, and we've since moved out of the state. So, yeah, that's how my husband was almost kidnapped for what I refused to imagine. I stayed awake for nights just holding him and feeling him breathe. I almost lost him. After the shock wore away, he became rather serious about working out because the fact that he couldn't have been able to fight the man off still haunts him. This happened to me back in 2007. I was 9 years old and my brother was 14. My mom had sent us out of the house with about $30 to go see a movie and maybe get a bite to eat afterwards. After seeing the movie, it was getting pretty dark and I was ready to go home. However, my brother wanted to get something to eat first and we agreed to walk to McDonald's, which was only a couple blocks from the movie theater. On our way there, we were stopped and approached by a man. He had a friendly smile plastered on his face, and he was holding his child's hand. At first, there didn't seem to be anything off about this man. He was average looking, and seemed to be nothing more than a father having a day out with his son. "Hey, do you two think you could give my son and I a hand real quick?" he asked. "We need help loading a mattress onto the back of our truck. The truck is just up the road." "I'm sorry, but we really don't have time," my brother said. It was at this time I noticed the little boy. He was about 8 years old and he looked abnormally thin. He had a blank expression on his face and wore clothes that were pretty much too big for him. I turned my attention back to the man, who was now mumbling to my brother about how it would only take a second. Once again, my brother kindly declined. Being the helpful kid I was, I joined in with the man and tried to persuade my brother that we should help them out. I turned to my brother, who was now staring down at the little boy. My brother had a disturbed expression on his face as he looked down at the child. The child stared back at my brother blankly. I didn't understand why my brother had the look on his face. He then grabs my hand and says, "Oh, I think that's my mom over there. We have to go." He pulled me and we began walking away from the man. I didn't understand what was going on and why my brother had just lied about my mom being there. He didn't let go of my hand and practically dragged me until we were a far distance away from the man and his son. I looked back and could still see the man holding his son's hand, only now he wasn't smiling anymore. He had a look of fury on his face and he yanked the little boy's arm and they walked away. I pulled away from my brother's grasp and bombarded him with questions. He shushed me and pulled out his cell phone. He dialed in a number and began pacing around nervously while talking on the phone. I then remembered the police showing up, and my mom came soon after. She then took me home, but my brother was left with the police. I had asked my mother what was going on, and she said that the police were just questioning my brother because the man we had encountered was dangerous. That's all she told me, and I went to bed. By the next morning, I had almost completely forgotten about the incident, and things went back to normal. It wasn't until a few days ago that these memories flooded back into my mind. I decided to call my now 22-year-old brother to get some answers. When I brought the whole ordeal back up to him, he finally gave me the information I wanted to know. And now that I know everything, I understand how terrifying our encounter with the man truly was. My brother told me that while the man was constantly trying to convince us to come with him, he happened to look at the little boy. The little boy then looked at my brother with his eyes filled with terror and mouthed the words, "I'm not his son. Please help me." Then his expression went back to being completely blank, almost as if he had never said anything at all. This was why he had become so freaked out and snatched me away. When he called the police, they hurried down and he described the man the best he could. Unfortunately, they couldn't do much with the very little information my brother had given, because we hadn't seen the card that the man supposedly had. My brother told me that a few weeks into the investigation, they had found the little boy, who was with the man, dead. His body had been cruelly dumped in the woods. The cause of his death was dehydration. If my brother and I had gone with the sicko, we likely would have met the same fate. He obviously couldn't have kidnapped both of us on his own, as my brother was a fairly strong fellow. That meant he had other pedophile partners who would help him snatch up unsuspecting kids. Unfortunately, they were never able to catch any of the sick people who did this to the child, but the man was definitely not his father. His real parents had already been searching for their missing son for almost a month. The pedophiles had managed to kidnap the poor kid and use him as their puppet to try and kidnap other kids. Every time I think about the boy, I feel a deep pity for him. He was only a year younger than I was at the time, and I could only imagine how terrible it must have been to slowly starve to death. This happened to my mom when she was a teenager, around 15 or 16 years old. This was during the 80s, and I still get goosebumps whenever my mom tells me this story. To cut to the chase, my mom and her two friends from high school were out on a picnic at this really neat little area that her friend knew about. According to her friend, the area wasn't well known to the public as it was very much off the beaten path, meaning it was far away from the public or locals. Anyway, they had packed up a blanket and had brought along multiple baskets of food, mostly consisting of bread and ham to make sandwiches. School was rough around this time, and my mom and her friends needed a break from all the chaos and stress, which is why they thought a picnic would be the perfect outing. At some point during their lunch, my mom excuses herself and tells her friends that she was going to the bathroom. With no restrooms around, my mom goes and walks about a few feet into the woods, far enough so that her friends can't see her. She does her business and gets back up when she notices what looks to be some sort of cave that dug deep into the earth. Being the intensively curious teen she was back then, she goes over to the entrance of the cave. It was dark and cold, but my mom was no coward and proceeded to descend into the cave. Thankfully, my mom had her small pack on her, which just so happened to have a mini flashlight, so she used it to light her way. All she could hear was the birds from outside and water dripping from somewhere deep into the cave. As she kept going, She immediately gets an unsettling feeling in her gut, like a strong sense of dread, but a part of her wanted to keep going to see where the end of the cave led to. The further she went, the stronger the feeling got. Eventually, she came across into some sort of large opening where she saw 5 large stones placed circling around each other. At this point, the feeling came back stronger than ever, and that almost made her turn back. Many of the rocks were covered with poorly graffitied monster-type faces. However, that wasn't the part that disturbed her the most. The rocks and walls were spray-painted with symbols of Satan in red, along with words that were somehow relating to death and suffering. That was the part that made my mom leave. She never did end up telling her friends about her discovery, fearing that she would get in trouble. To this day, my mom still hasn't figured out what that mysterious cave was for. She doesn't know if it was an elaborate joke or if it was something else. But she still wonders what that hidden room was for, and the horrible things that might have taken place there. Whatever it was enough to creep her out for a very, very long time. When I was about 14, my family and I moved into an old house that was at least 60 years old. Surprisingly, it was still in pretty good condition for a house that old. Anyway, my sister and I had shared one room together, and as big as this house was, it didn't have many bedrooms. Just a master bedroom and a spare. Oftentimes, our parents would go out during the day for work or go into town to run some errands, and us kids wanted no part of that. One day, my dad was at work while my mom was out doing her weekly routine of shopping, and my sister and I were home alone. My sister was 9 at the time, and I always looked up to her. Since our parents were gone, we both decided to do a small little picnic out in our backyard. Our backyard is huge. You might as well consider it as a miniature field. My sister brings out the chips and heats up our leftover burgers from the other night while I set up the table and chairs for our picnic. Even though our house was nice, we didn't have a TV, and this was before iPhones came out, so a picnic was the closest thing to entertainment. We start eating while talking to each other when I notice a car sitting at the edge of our driveway. A 2003 Nissan Altima to be exact. Right off the bat, I knew that it wasn't any of my parents' cars as they don't drive a Nissan, and as far as I know, they were still out. I took a closer look at it and noticed someone in the front seat, staring intently at us. We did happen to live in an area that was notorious for creeps, so I dismissed it as one of them. Suddenly, I heard the car door slam and see that this guy is walking towards us. He was not a pleasant-looking man. He had long, messy gray hair and a fat beard gut. He kept walking closer to us and asks us if we were enjoying our food and if we were okay. I give a waving gesture and tell him that we were fine, hoping he would get the hint to leave us alone. However, that didn't seem to faze him, because he kept coming directly towards us while giving us an unsettling smile I can't even describe. Once he got to us, he said something that made my heart stop. "I've got some more food for you guys in my car. Let's go get some." Now, my parents were always strict with us kids about the stranger danger type thing, and I told the guy to leave us alone or I'd call the cops. He lifted his flannel to reveal a handgun sticking out of his pocket, and that's when he got upset. "I'd much appreciate it if you would just reconsider." At this point, my sister starts crying, and even though I was 14, I couldn't take this guy on, especially if he had a gun, even if I tried. Thankfully, one of my neighbors happened to be walking his dog and noticed the whole ordeal. When he saw this, he said, "Hey, who the hell are you?" The man went pale, and his eyes were as big as saucers. As soon as he knew that he was caught, he full-on ran back to his car and sped down the road. My neighbor stayed with us until the cops and my mom came, but they unfortunately never found the man. My parents now have someone watch over us until I was 16, and nothing has happened to us ever since, and we thankfully never saw that man again. This happened a few years ago while on a road trip with some of my close friends from high school. It was the middle of summer, and we all planned on taking a trip up to my uncle's beach house in Cape Cod. It was my uncle's house, but seeing as he was on vacation, he was nice enough to allow us to go for a weekend trip. School had a lot of stress on us, so a weekend trip seemed like the perfect getaway. We all had packed lunch and stuff to make sandwiches in case we got hungry. I know, it's not the best thing to eat, but we were 16 and broke high school students, so we couldn't afford to stop at local restaurants. About halfway through our road trip, we all started to get hungry, and we didn't want to get there on an empty stomach. So in the end, we eventually decided to pull over to the side of the road, where there just so happened to be a picnic table right by some trees along with a small park grill. We hop out of the car and bring our food to the table and start making cheese sandwiches while stuffing ourselves with chips. So we're sitting there, having a decent lunch, when I look ahead and notice what appeared to be someone in the woods about 20 or so feet away, peering out from a tree. At first, I thought that we could have been on somebody's land, and seeing as we were on the outskirts of Rhode Island, there's a lot of private property around here. I stand up and ask them if this was private property. However, they didn't respond. At this point, we couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but whoever they were started acting very abnormal. They kept hiding behind the tree, peering out every few seconds as if they were trying to hide from us. I then got a very strange and unsettling feeling, and something began to tell me that this wasn't some strict property owner. I get up from our table and walk over to where I saw them, and the closer I got, I began to realize that it was a woman. Maybe late 30s, medium build, and for whatever reason she was wearing a tank top with a phone in her right pocket. She then stepped out from behind the tree, and that was when I noticed that she was hiding something behind her back. I had no interest in finding out as to what it was, but it was obviously something she didn't want me to see. I asked her again if she needed help and if this was her property. This time, I got a response. In a very deep and monotone voice, she said,
"My husband kicked me out of the house. I have a friend who lives up the street. Can you give me a ride?"
This caught me off guard, and I was beginning to think that this girl actually needed help. However, her request wasn't formal or direct. It sounded as if it had been practiced, and something in my gut told me not to do it. If this girl really did have a friend close by, why couldn't she have just called her to pick her up instead of relying on us? I politely declined and told her that we had to be somewhere. Then again, she repeated the same phrase.
"My husband kicked me out of the house. I have a friend who lives up the street. Can you give me a ride?"
Once again, I told her no and signaled to my friends that we had to start packing up. She looked at me, staring into my soul, and repeated the same phrase.
My husband kicked me out of the house. I have a friend who lives up the street. Can you give me a ride?
I again gave her a firm no. And then she said 5 words that sent a chill down my spine.
You made the right decision.
This happened to me and my girlfriend when we were in our late 30s while on a camping trip in rural Wisconsin. I've always been a camping fanatic ever since I was younger. My family and I would often take long camping trips in the mountains and stay there for a few nights, which I enjoyed. It was me and my girlfriend Maya, who is now currently my wife. We were going camping in a really secluded area of a national park. The park itself had a lot of good camping sites, but seeing as we didn't like camping near others, we decided to find a much more quiet spot. We ended up setting up our tent on a bank right beside a massive lake, which was exactly what we were looking for. So that evening, we had cooked some hot dogs over the fire we had built, and were listening to the radio while drinking our asses off when my girlfriend turns the music down and asks, "Babe, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked. My girlfriend had explained to me that she heard footsteps in the woods about 10 feet from the campfire. Fearing that it could have been a bear or perhaps a mountain lion, I get out my .22 from my bag and pointed at the tree line, but didn't see anything. I assured her it was most likely a deer and that we should get some rest as it was getting late. That night, we were both in our tent and my girlfriend had fallen asleep way before I did. Me, on the other hand, had trouble falling asleep, so I would constantly find myself rolling around trying to find a good sleeping position. Eventually, I fell asleep after a good 20 minutes, but was awoke to a loud, blood-curdling scream. It was nothing I've ever heard before. I sat bolt upright as my blood practically ran cold, wondering who or what the hell that was. At this point, I'm shaking my girlfriend, telling her what I heard, and that we had to get in the truck. Not caring what we left behind, we unzipped the tent and full-on ran back to the truck, but not before hearing the same scream again, this time right beside the lake. We got into the truck and sped down the gravel dirt road back onto the main highway, where we found a 24-hour hotel that was still open. This was by far the creepiest and most unexplained encounter I've ever had.
This event happened to me around last summer. It was probably the scariest story of my life, and I wanted to share it so hopefully someone learned from it. Something I've realized growing up, year by year, is that this world can be an amazing place, but it is filled with some super sick people. And unfortunately, I've seen that side of the world firsthand. I'm a very social person, and love the opportunity to hang out with friends whenever. I'm also the type of person who's always looking for the next big thing. I guess I should tell you, I was an 18-year-old male at the time of this story, and have a decent-sized friend group of both boys and girls. Throughout high school, we had done a lot of crazy shit together. Being just out of high school, we wanted to do something insane together before departing for college. And we all decided to go camping in the middle of nowhere for 3 days. Fun, right? And for some miracle, All our parents thought it'd be fine. So we had 6 people going. Me and my girlfriend Stephanie, my friend Brandon and his girlfriend Kaylee, and Steven and his girlfriend Sarah. We had decided to have 3 different tents for each group, for reasons you could probably guess. Being a former Boy Scout, I was aware of everything we needed to survive for 3 days: food, water, and other essential supplies. Being rebellious teenagers, we also stocked up on plenty of booze and weed for a fun getaway. So, mid-July, we depart for a camping vacation. After hours of driving and driving down back roads, we eventually find a place that looks secluded, but not too sketchy like some horror stories. There were houses nearby, but not too close. Again, we weren't looking for a sketchy woods to camp, but unfortunately no service. I took at least an hour for everything to get set up. While the girls and Steve finished setting up the camp, Brandon and I took a look around while fetching firewood. We eventually came across a cool-looking trail. We weren't too concerned, because there were houses within a mile radius, and we assumed that those people had used the trail to hunt, which was big in this area, or animals used it. If you're wondering about our car, we drove a Honda Pilot, which was Steve's, that had plenty of room for us and our supplies. We parked the car rather close to the site, so we had eyes on the car at all times. The first night, nothing much happened. We rolled a blunt and drank a bit, and called it a night. The next day, we decided to explore the woods a bit, but Brandon and Kaylee stayed behind to watch the site and spend time together. We decided to go down a path we found earlier. Around 20 minutes down the path, Steve spots a metal fence. We approach it to find a cemetery. The cemetery looked old, but there were signs of activity there. And no, not some voodoo shit or cult, like flowers and notes left. And beyond the cemetery, we saw a bigger trail that had tire tracks and half-assed parking lot for the cemetery. We ventured down the path a bit more to spot some deer, then head back because it was getting late. That night, we really partied hard because we were about to leave the next day and didn't want to return with extra beer or weed. Now, this night was the polar opposite of the other night. The other night was peaceful, and we assumed the same about this night. As we began to turn in, boy, were we wrong. Now, you would assume there would have been warning signs early in our trip, like a rusty knife on the path or foot tracks around our site. No, not at all. All of us woke to a blood-curdling scream coming from Steve and Sarah's tent, as we heard the fabric being ripped. What we assumed was something sharp. I guess Steve hit the guy really hard with the flashlight and was able to get both him and Sarah to his car. Now here's the issue. Steve's tent is the closest to the car, while the other 2 tents are closer to the trail. So, to get to Steve's car, we had to get past whatever attacked Steve and Sarah. Luckily, all our drunken selves were gone because before getting into the car, he yelled cemetery, and it clicked in my head. The trail on the other side of the cemetery. So I quickly grabbed Brandon, Kaylee, and Stephanie and started running towards the trail. I used my phone flashlight to help see. You might think, why would you turn the flashlight on? Well, last thing I wanted to do was miss the cemetery and be lost in the woods with the guy who attacked Steve. By the time we get to the trail, Steve and Sarah had gotten out from the site, and we could hear the guy chasing us, but from several yards behind. We were able to find the cemetery rather easily, and I hopped over the fence first. When we get over the fence, we noticed Steve had not arrived yet, so we all hid in the cemetery. Luckily to our advantage, it was pitch black by the time I had turned the flashlight off, and we all hid in a complete silence. My heart stopped when I heard the metallic shaking, as if someone was climbing over the fence. The guy had tracked us down, probably due to the fact that Steve yelled, "Cemetery!" We all stayed still as we heard the ground crunch, as the guy took slow steps. When in fight or flight moments, you are capable of a lot more than you think, and your brain is put in some super high alert mode, or some shit. As the guy approached, I realized I had a small Swiss Army pocket knife in my pocket. as the guy's steps grew closer to me. When he was right about on top of me, I grabbed the knife and lodged it into the back of his knee. The guy tumbled to the ground, with a shriek of pain and the metallic sound as he dropped his weapon. Soon the pair of headlights came around the corner. Steve had made it. We all got up and ran towards the car. While I got up, the light gave me a glimpse of the guy. He was tall, bulky, and had the look of pure hatred in his eyes as he clutched the back of his knee, and by his side, a huge machete. I was the last one to get to the car, and even before I fully closed the door, Steve flirted out of there. The girls were bawling their eyes out. We drove until the first house, where we politely knocked and asked for directions to a motel or something. It was a friendly old couple. They told us there had not been one for miles. They took us in and gave us warm food and a place to rest for the remainder of the night. In the morning, the man brought his hunting rifle with us to retrieve our stuff from the campsite. When we got there was nothing stolen, but all our tents were slashed up. The elderly woman called and made a report while we were gone, and when we got back, the officers were at their home, and we gave our statements. The officer said that there's not enough evidence to find the guy, but he promised a search. We headed home later that day. No one said a word on the way home. We were all processing what had really happened. The police unfortunately never found the guy. Yeah, college split us up a bit, but we barely talk about it as a group. It's been a year. My advice to all of you is please find a populated place to camp. I don't care if it's some Yogi Bear camp. Be in reach of help and the police. Stay safe, guys. Please.
I live in the country with my dad, and this happened to me just a few years ago after my parents had separated when I was only 8. We live on private property in a very secluded area of the nearest town, meaning we were completely isolated for most of the time. It could be a bit lonely sometimes, but we very much enjoyed being far away from other people, and that's just how we were and still are. One day, my dad had left for work and I would be home alone until he got back. I had been left alone several times, so I was used to it, and my dad trusted me very well. So, fast forward to around 3 p.m., I finished playing some video games and walked into the kitchen to get a snack. I looked to my left down the hall to see that the guest bedroom door was slightly open. This was very strange, as that door has never once been opened unless we have family over, so there was no reason as to why it should have been unlocked. Knowing my dad would have probably lectured me if he found out, I go into the room to see if the lock might have been broken. At this point, I call my dad while having my Xbox controller in hand when I accidentally drop it next to the bed. My dad, of course, doesn't answer, so I hang up and crouch down to get my controller. And that's when I see something under my bed. It only took me a few seconds to realize that there was someone under the bed. By some stupid luck, they were facing the other way so they couldn't see me. Trying to act like I didn't notice them, I simply walked out of the room and ran straight to the neighbor's house, which was about a mile away. Thankfully, they let me use their phone to call the police, and I led the police to where I saw the man. But just like in most situations like this, he was gone when the police got there.
I'm an Irish female, and this happened back in 2007, when I was in my mid-20s. Back then, I loved going to clubs and dancing the night away. One particular night, I went out with some friends, which included my cousin Frank. We went to a nightclub, had some drinks, and danced to Daft Punk's One More Time, as well as other popular music at the time. I wasn't living in this town at the time, so I arranged to stay at Frank's house. We had the fridge stocked with beer for when we got back and planned on getting wasted. We probably left the club at around 1 a.m. and got a taxi to his house. Back at Frank's house, we spent a few hours listening to Led Zeppelin, Nirvana with a bit of Metallica thrown in for good measure. My cousin was in a rock band and loved the classics. At around 3 a.m., Frank's bandmate, Jack, called and asked if we could come over and stay. He had been clubbing at a different location and needed somewhere to crash. Frank lived alone in a 3-bedroom house, and being a single guy, he hosted a few wild parties over the years. Frank told him no problem. He can come over, but explained we were having a quiet night. In other words, not to bring anyone else. Jack came over and seemed super friendly. Being the drummer of the band, he looked exactly like what I expected. Long hair, Zeppelin t-shirt, and ripped jeans. His behavior changed not long after arriving. He was super animated, and I don't know, just on a different buzz. He seemed drugged on something, and hey, as long as he enjoys himself, who am I to judge? At one stage, he started playing air drums, and continued with that for ages. During one of the air drum solos, I asked him something, and he didn't answer. I kinda nudged him, very lightly, but just to get his attention. Jack went crazy, and started shouting at me to never interrupt him when he was playing drums. Drums? Sorry, did he really think he was playing real ones? Anyway, this pissed me off. I didn't like the aggression. Frank said, "Relax, man. There's no need to shout." Jack replied, "No one should interrupt me when I'm in the zone, man. No one." Me and Frank eye-rolled and carried on chatting, drinking, and ignoring him. The atmosphere changed after that, and after a short time, I went to bed. I don't know how long after, but I was awoken from a deep sleep. I heard this breathing sound in my room. Still in a drunken slumber, it took me a few minutes to register that the noise sounded like someone inhaling. Someone was in my bed, with a bunch of my hair in his hand sniffing it. I froze, then said, "What are you doing?" Jack replied, "Relax. I'm just smelling your hair. I'm not gonna do anything." Well, adrenaline coursed through me, but I was stuck to the bed with fear, and the room was pitch black. I shouted, "Frank!" at the top of my voice, and in speedy time he ran in the room, turned on the light, only to find Jack in my bed, holding a handful of my hair. He said, "It's not what it looks like, bud. I was only smelling it." I was sleeping facing the door, so could see Frank. I dared not to look behind me to see Jack, but his voice sounded like that of a child that knows he's done something wrong and is about to get in trouble. Frank lost it. My cousin apologized and said he did not want to kick him out of the house in the drugged up state he was in. The door had no lock, so my cousin slept in a chair in front of my bedroom door. Jack actually tried to come in again. I woke to Frank telling him to get the hell back downstairs, or he's going to kick him out of the house. Jack retreated once again. The next day he was gone by the time I woke up. But a few days later, when Frank tracked Jack down, he was told he'd been mixing drugs with alcohol and was embarrassed by his behavior. Even though it's been years since it happened, it still gives me the creeps when I think about it. Those sniffing sounds, big, deep, slow inhales, still give me goosebumps. The band broke up not long after that, so I never had to meet him again. I was told he was a good guy, so he may have been on drugs that made him super strange. I'm just glad Frank was there, or who knows how I would have got him out of my room.